My parents and my sister's family had invited me to a three-star hotel Christmas dinner under the guise of celebrating the holiday together. I had been hesitant to accept. Family dinners had never been simple, especially with the subtle tension that seemed to hang in the air whenever we were all in the same room. But the thought of spending Christmas alone didn't appeal to me either, so I agreed, telling myself it might be a chance to reconnect and perhaps mend some old wounds. When I arrived at the hotel, I was greeted by the warm, artificial glow of the lobby, which smelled faintly of pine and cinnamon. My parents were there smiling, though their smiles seemed rehearsed, almost forced. My sister's family was already seated at the table, a large round one, perfectly set with red and gold decorations. I noticed my niece and nephew fidgeting with the cutlery, clearly excited by the festive lights and the promise of dessert. The whole scene was picture perfect, if a bit too polished to feel genuinely warm. As we all sat down, my father immediately started small talk about work and local news, while my mother subtly tried to steer the conversation toward lighter topics, like the decorations and the hotel's Christmas tree. My sister, on the other hand, seemed unusually tense, exchanging quick glances with her husband as if to signal some kind of unspoken understanding. It didn't take long for me to sense that this dinner wasn't just about Christmas. There was something more beneath the surface, a reason why they had insisted on meeting at a hotel instead of home, where conversations could have been more private. After a few minutes of polite chatter, my sister's husband cleared his throat and said, "We're glad you could make it tonight. There's something important we need to discuss." My stomach sank immediately. I nodded cautiously, unsure whether to ask what it was or wait for them to continue. My mother gave me a quick, encouraging smile, though it didn't ease the knot forming in my chest. They began to explain that the family finances had become a bit complicated recently. Apparently, some unexpected expenses had arisen: medical bills, repairs on the family home, and some debts my parents had tried to manage quietly. Then came the part I wasn't expecting. They were discussing inheritance and how certain assets would be divided among the family. My parents had always been generous and fair, or so I thought, but hearing them speak in such cold, calculated terms was jarring. My sister and her husband seemed very confident about their claims, speaking as though everything had already been decided and I was simply being informed. I tried to stay calm, taking small sips of water and forcing a neutral expression. They asked for my opinion on certain decisions, but it felt more like a formality than a genuine request. Every time I tried to interject or suggest an alternative, my sister would cut me off with a polite but firm, "We've already considered that." I felt a mix of anger and sadness bubbling up inside me. This was supposed to be a Christmas dinner, a moment of togetherness, and instead, it felt like a negotiation table. At one point, I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. Standing in front of the mirror, I could barely recognize myself, my face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. I had expected some awkwardness, maybe a difficult conversation, but not this level of cold, clinical discussion. I wondered if my parents really thought this was appropriate to discuss money and inheritance at a festive dinner, in front of everyone, including my niece and nephew, who were now giggling at a nearby waiter juggling napkins. When I returned, the conversation had shifted slightly, though not to a warmer topic. My father had started talking about his will, explaining which properties and savings were earmarked for whom. My sister chimed in, suggesting how certain assets could be consolidated to benefit the family. Overall, I listened quietly, nodding occasionally, trying to mask the growing frustration. I realized that no matter what I said, they had already made up their minds. It was more about asserting control than seeking consensus. Dinner arrived, a beautiful spread of roasted meats, vegetables, and desserts, but I barely touched the food. Every bite felt tasteless, as though it had absorbed the tension in the room. My niece and nephew were delighted with the chocolate cake, oblivious to the undercurrents around them. Watching their innocent joy made the situation even more surreal. A reminder of what Christmas was supposed to be about: family, warmth, togetherness. And yet here we were, negotiating like business partners over who would inherit what. At one point, my mother reached over and tried to hold my hand, whispering, "I know it's uncomfortable, but we're just trying to be fair." Her words should have comforted me, but they didn't. The notion of fairness in this setting seemed warped. Fairness should not be discussed with the precision of a ledger in a dimly lit hotel dining room. I gently pulled my hand back, realizing that this evening was not going to end with smiles and laughter. After what felt like hours, the discussion finally wound down, with agreements and compromises reluctantly met at me. Sister and her husband left the room feeling victorious, or at least satisfied, and my parents seemed exhausted, perhaps from carrying the weight of trying to keep everyone content. I paid my portion quietly, barely speaking, and excused myself, claiming an early night. The elevator ride down felt endless, every floor descending like a countdown to escape. Once outside, the cold night air hit me, and I took a deep breath, letting the crispness calm my nerves. I realized that family dynamics could be complicated, and that even during holidays, hidden tensions could surface. I also understood something important. No one could dictate my feelings or my worth. I had come hoping for warmth and instead found strategy and negotiation. But that didn't diminish who I was or what I deserved. On the drive home, I replayed the evening in my mind, feeling a mixture of disappointment and clarity. I was disappointed that a Christmas dinner had turned into a business meeting, but I also felt clarity about my boundaries. I didn't need to accept unfair treatment or pretend to be happy when I wasn't. Sometimes, showing up for family meant facing uncomfortable truths, and sometimes it meant walking away with dignity intact. That night, I sat by my own Christmas tree at home, quiet except for the soft hum of the lights. I poured myself a cup of tea and reflected on what had happened. I thought about my niece and nephew, how their laughter had momentarily cut through the tension. I thought about my parents, who had tried to navigate difficult choices but had lost sight of the emotional side of family. And I thought about myself, realizing that being true to my feelings and standing firm didn't make me selfish, it made me resilient. I decided that next Christmas, if I attended another family dinner, it would be on my terms. I would be present in spirit, but I would protect my peace and my sense of self. And maybe, just maybe, I would invite my niece and nephew to my own little celebration, where laughter and warmth came first, and discussions about money came much later, if at all. That evening taught me more than any conversation about inheritance could. It taught me that family can be complicated, sometimes disappointing, but it also taught me the importance of self-respect. And as I sipped my tea, watching the tiny lights twinkle on the tree, I realized that even in imperfect moments, I could find a sense of Christmas within myself. Leaving the hotel that night, I understood something I had been avoiding for years. Sometimes the people who share your history aren't the ones who truly support your future. The Christmas dinner, framed as a family gathering, revealed more than financial plans. It exposed the emotional imbalance that had quietly shaped our relationships. My opinions were treated like formalities, my presence like an obligation, and my feelings like an afterthought. But instead of breaking me, the experience opened my eyes. I realized I could no longer shrink myself to keep the peace or stay silent to avoid conflict. That night marked a shift, a quiet but powerful reclaiming of my own voice. I chose to step back, to protect my mental peace, and to stop accepting the bare minimum simply because it came from family. Back home, sitting beside my small Christmas tree, I felt something unexpected: relief. I finally understood that distance isn't betrayal, it's self-respect. And while my family may never see the impact of their choices, I now see my own worth clearly.